Now for part 2 of this video, we're going to look at libertarianism in the US. Part 1 focused more on conservatism. Now we're going to tackle libertarianism and how that entire ideology has collapsed in on itself because it just has too many internal contradictions. So we go back to Cartec's law of inflation, and out of the 8 key points, there are 6 that are very specific to what libertarians say all day long, and are rife whenever any libertarian talks about inflation or money printing or whether human prosperity has in fact risen at all in the last 110 years. So we'll go to an example of what libertarianism today has become. This is a tweet from the Libertarian Party, national version, and they like to produce this chart which other libertarians then retweet or make their own versions of, and they think they are revealing something important. They say a dollar's worth has fallen 96% since 1913. A dollar's worth has fallen 96%. What does that mean? It is heavily implying that we are vastly poorer than we were in 1913. And we are continuing to get poorer and poorer because of this. Human prosperity is going down. It also implies that the US is the only country in the world because other major countries also have central banks, and the conversion rate between the US dollar and other major currencies such as the British pound, the euro, and the Japanese yen has been about the same for the last at least 30 years or so. So the notion that the dollar is being debased is absurd when the conversion rate between all these currencies remains about the same. But this type of chart is very manipulative because less intelligent people will take this as a reason to believe that society is getting worse and worse and worse. Now let me give you some examples about how absurd it is to say that a dollar's worth has fallen 96% since 1913, and somehow this means that we are perpetually getting poorer. The number of people on Earth is about 20 times more than it was 1,000 years ago. 20 times more. That means the amount of land available per capita is 1/20th of what it was 1,000 years ago. Therefore, we must be much poorer than we were 1,000 years ago because everyone has only 1/20th as much land. Think about that. Think about the absurdity of what I said and how it implies that land is the only measurement of prosperity and nothing technological should even be considered, and that is how one could think that prosperity has fallen by a 95% factor to 1/20th relative to 1,000 years ago. But even that example does not do full justice to how absurd this narrative is, because land is in fact a finite resource at the moment on planet Earth. A more accurate metaphor is something even more absurd. In prehistoric times, there were only a small number of humans, and there were a lot more larger animals, both on land and in the ocean. In fact, the ocean had many, many large whales, much more numerous than today. Even in the 19th century, the number of blue whales, the world's largest animal, and the largest animal ever known to have existed, was 300,000 versus maybe 7,000 to 10,000 today because of whaling. Under this logic, one should feel good that the number of humans has risen from just a few tens of thousands in prehistoric times to 8 billion today, and that the number of large animals has gone down so that there's more air that humans can breathe. By getting rid of all these large animals and driving them to extinction, whether whales, elephants, rhinos, tigers, polar bears, whatever, there's more air for humans to breathe, and therefore humans are winning. Now think about how ridiculous that is. Yet the argument being made here by libertarians is very similar. You can no more say that there's a fixed amount of dollars and therefore it's being debased than you can say that the extinction of large animals is good for humans, because then there's more air available for humans and for the livestock that humans maintain. So for some perspective, that is how absurd this libertarian core belief is. And we take it further. If you really believe that humans are poorer than 110 years ago, and fine, if you pose this question to a libertarian point blank, they will say, no, of course we're more prosperous than 110 years ago, but they don't realize that when they put out charts like this, that is at least insinuating to naive people that the opposite is true. Consider this chart. Under that dollar falling by 96% in value paradigm, a libertarian will see this chart and complain that the number of people in absolute poverty in the modern age, at least 2015, is not much lower than it was in 1820. Ignore the green part altogether. That is the point that they're making. Because the number of people in absolute poverty is not that much lower, and in fact was higher until 1960 or so, this green part should be ignored. That is effectively what they're saying. They will never say this directly, but by posting that dollar devaluation chart, they're effectively saying something like this, that this is bad. And they're contradicting this basic fact of how human prosperity has in fact risen tremendously from 95% of people being poor in 1820 to under 10% of people being poor in 2015. This is why libertarian core beliefs are in direct contradiction with each other, and most of them don't have any coherent belief system anymore. For example, everyone familiar with this channel knows that I wrote an entire book about how income tax on humans can be made 0% gradually phased down to 0%, even while we have a more robust safety net than we have now, and that safety net exponentially rises in terms of the amount of dollar payout you get, even with 0% income tax. So where does the money come from? From monetizing technological deflation, of course. Now you'd think libertarianism would be about automation and other high-tech solutions to deliver governance services for a fraction of the price. A certain governance service should drop in price by a factor of 100, and therefore you don't even need taxes to pay for it anymore. You would think that that's what libertarians would believe. But no, in fact, they are completely anti-technology in every conceivable way because they have lost their minds about both inflation and money printing and cannot figure out why so much money printing has not caused aberrant inflation, as I have heavily proven on this channel and continue to do so every month. And therefore, a libertarian is more accurately described in 2023 as a Ludditarian. That's a new word that I'm creating, and I've been posting it on Twitter for some time, because they are directly opposed to virtually all technological disruptions, even if they don't realize it. The number of internal contradictions in their beliefs about inflation and money printing and the relationship between the two has truly made them lose their minds, because they put out charts like that about how the value of the US dollar has fallen by 96%. Therefore, we must be much poorer than we were in 1913, 110 years ago. That's what a libertarian either believes, or if they say that, no, we're not actually poorer than 110 years ago, but the dollar has fallen in value, then what are they trying to say? What point are they trying to make? Because the dollar falling in value based on just the number of dollars in existence rising does not mean people became poorer. Think about that metaphor I gave about how now there's more air available to humans because we drove all other large animals to the brink of extinction. And as we saw from one of the points out of Karthik's law of inflation, their worldview has precluded any wealth creation or prosperity increase from being legitimate and anything other than an example of more inflation. The existence of any tech billionaire is in fact contrary to the worldview of what these libertarians have become, because a tech billionaire, by definition, has suffered something terrible. They have suffered from an extreme amount of personal hyperinflation. It's not that their living standard rose, they suffered from a horrible thing, an extreme amount of personal hyperinflation, thousands of times more than the average person. What a horrible thing to experience. So libertarianism as an ideology is intellectually unviable, mainly because they have lost their minds on the topic of inflation. Now we continue on to part 3 of this 3-part video series, where we examine the dumbest of the dumb. So stay tuned for that with part 3.